All right. Let's wait 1 or 2 minutes to let people sign in arrive, and then we'll get started here. All right. Without any further ado, Shalom, Bruchim Bayis, and welcome to Mishkan class number 6 after a short break due to the need to be close to home and with the family in the recent somewhat turbulent times. Baruch Hashem, we are back in action, and today we are beginning the construction of the Mishkan, which is very exciting, from the foundations of the courtyard of the Mishkan, and which is very connected to the concept of consistency. So B'ezrat Hashem, we will return to the consistency of our Mishkan learning. But of course, as we've learned before, that part of the uniqueness of the Mishkan was that Am Yisrael would take it down and rebuild it. So just as we had to temporarily dismantle our Mishkan classes with the koach, the power and strength of the Mishkan, we'll set it up again and continue with our learning, Be'ezrat Hashem. So today's class, what do we have on the menu? We'll start, as always, with a review to look over the concepts that we've covered in the past classes. And we're going to, the following 3 classes, our focus is going to be on the walls of the courtyard, which will take us to the end of this part of the series of the Mishkan learning. And to begin with constructing the walls of the courtyard, today we will be specifically discussing the foundations of the amudim, the columns that supported the walls of the courtyard. And now, as we'll discuss, these foundations were built from the metal copper, and we'll discuss how copper, the metal, is connected to the concept of stubbornness or boldness or azut in nachishut, and how we can connect to the sad b'kedusha, the holy side of this stubbornness or boldness. To explore that, we'll go into a few stories, a story from Sipuri Maisiot, from Rabbi Nachman, a fresh story from Gimel Tammuz, which was yesterday evening, and a story from the son of the Chofetz Chaim to balance things out. And we'll conclude with some practical steps to integrate this, and that will be our homework for the week to come. Give me just one moment before we continue. Okay. Very good. So to review the concepts that we've covered in the past classes, as we discussed, the construction of Mishkan was the fulfillment of the purpose of creation, which was to create here in this physical, material world a dwelling place for the Shechina, a divine presence, as we quoted from the Baal Tanya, that this is the whole purpose of man in the creation of all the worlds, the upper worlds and the lower worlds, that Hashem, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, should have a dwelling place here in the lower worlds. And this was accomplished by Am Yisrael, by the Jewish people, first by the construction of the Mishkan in the desert after receiving the Torah on Har Sinai, and later in the construction of the Beis HaMikdash in Yerushalayim. And this is relevant to each and every Jew, as it says, "V'asuli Mikdash v'shachanti b'tocham," and our sages say on b'tocham. Why is it not, the Torah not saying that Hashem will dwell within the Mishkan, but rather within them? And it says, because by building the Mishkan, Hashem dwells within each and every Jew. And where do we fulfill this construction of the Mishkan? In our personal lives, specifically in our home, in our family and marriage relationship. As Rabbi Akiva says, if a husband and wife merit, the Shechina dwells between them, just like the Mishkan was a dwelling place for the Shechina, so too when we merit by following in the ways of Torah, and specifically through applying the inner blueprint, the spiritual blueprint of the Mishkan to our home and family life, we transform our home to be a place where the Shechina can mamish truly dwell. And our sages would call the Jewish home a Mikdash Me'at, a microcosmic Mikdash, a holy space, the title that was applied to both the Mishkan and the Beis HaMikdash. When we integrate this spiritual blueprint of the Mishkan into our lives, it has the potential to fill our life with meaning and purpose, which we will discuss today, specifically how the Mishkan vision can bring meaning and purpose into even the most mundane and boring details of our daily life. And at the same time, by aligning all of the details of our life with this spiritual blueprint of the Mishkan, it creates for us an amazing vessel for bracha, for blessing, in material, in spiritual, in good health, and parnasa, and joy to flow into our life. Specifically, practically, we start to accomplish this through building a shared vision with our spouse and within our family, and a shared language to how we go about building this and discussing this vision, and an actionable framework, practical steps to take this vision from koach to poel, from potential to reality. And when we merit to apply this, as we discussed, we can make our home into a place where the Shechina can dwell. We can make our home a space of kedusha, of holiness. And when we do this, we merit to shalom, to peace, as we say, Shalom Bayis. And as our sages say, Kadosh Baruch Hu, Hashem did not find a more fitting vessel for bracha, for blessing, than shalom. And we discussed in previous classes the importance of having a Mishkan vision, which is our personal take, if we will, on how we apply this spiritual blueprint of the Mishkan to our individual life. And this is something we can continually build with our partner, with our spouse, our husband or wife. And we discussed how this Mishkan vision needs to become the center point of our home, of our marriage, and our family, just like the Aron Kodesh, the holy Ark of the Covenant, was the center point of the Mishkan and later the Beis HaMikdash. Inside of it was the luchot, the tablets, which Moshe Rabbeinu received on Har Sinai, the essence of the Torah. And just like the Torah is Hashem's vision for the world and for our nation, so too we need to personalize that vision and put it in our center. And from that center point, we learn to define our boundaries, what is allowed and not allowed to come into our home, into our Mishkan space. And when those boundaries are defined based on that center point of the Mishkan vision, one, it makes it easier to communicate with our spouse and easier to get on the same page. And they also become filled with meaning, because instead of just, I don't want this in the house because I don't like it, it transformed to, we are setting a boundary for this to protect the holiness of our home. Because of our shared vision, we understand why XYZ is not going to help us or even cause harm to building this vision. So we are making this boundary. And so that segues us beautifully into the discussion for the next three classes, which is the details of the construction of the wall of the courtyard. And this was the dividing line between holy and mundane, between Kodesh and Chol. And as we discussed, that there were many practical laws of the boundaries of the Mishkan, who was permitted to enter, that someone had to be in a state of ritual purity, what kind of objects were allowed to enter the Mishkan. But where was the dividing line? Was this wall. So by learning to build the walls of our Mishkan, these spiritual walls, we are opening the space through which we can enter into the deepest levels of holiness and connection within our home and family life. So we continue building the Mishkan, the walls of the courtyard. We can see in this fantastic illustration from the Temple Institute, an artist's rendition of the construction of the Mishkan. Again, in every place that Am Yisrael would camp in their journey through the desert for 40 years, they would set up the Mishkan. So the different teams, the different families of the Levim and the Kohanim, each had a different job of who would be responsible for the different parts of the construction. And we can see here the construction of the walls. I don't know if you can see my mouse, but it's everything on the right side of the picture, where we have these amudim, the pillars, and at the bottom of the pillars we have the adniot, the foundations, these big blocks of copper. That will be our discussion. At the top of the amud we had a special hook. You can see this guy right here up at the top of the ladder who is hanging something on the hook. We'll have another picture in the upcoming slide. And from the hook was hung these linen tapestries, which were a woven mesh, which created the wall of the Mishkan. So as it says in the Torah, and you shall make the courtyard of the Mishkan on the southern side. There will be hangings for the courtyard of twisted fine linen, 100 cubits long on one side, and its pillars shall be 20, and their sockets 20 of copper, the sockets being the foundations that we're discussing today, and the hooks of the pillars and their bands shall be of silver. And just to make a note that this particular verse is referring to just one side of the Mishkan, because in total there were 60 pillars that formed the walls of the courtyard of the Mishkan, 20 on the two long sides, that would be the north and south side, and 10 on the east and west side. And I think we'll discuss in the next class the concept of the 60, but to touch on it briefly is that just like we have 60 seconds in a minute and 60 minutes in an hour, the concept of the pillars of the Mishkan teaches us how to take every single moment of the day and connect it to our Mishkan vision. To go in a little deeper, we can see what Rashi brings from the Midrash related to the construction of the Mishkan, and their sockets of the pillars were copper, and the sockets rested and the pillars were inserted into them. Betzalel made a sort of rod, and it was 6 handbreadths long and 3 handbreadths wide, with a copper ring affixed to each rod in the middle, and would wrap the edge of the hanging, the twisted linen tapestry around it, the rod with the cords placed opposite every pillar. He would hang each rod by its ring from the hook that was on each pillar. The hook was made resembling a sort of vav, its end upright and one end inserted into the pillow, like those hooks made to hold up doors. And the width of the hanging hung below the hook, and this was the height of the partitions of the courtyard. Let's see if here we go. So we have a great illustration for this. So here is the pillar, the amud. In the bottom is their adnehem, the foundations, the socket, I think is how we translated before. And up top, we have this idea of the hook. We're going to get, Bezrat Hashem, some more detailed illustrations for us. This should help us for now. And today's topic is the foundations, this copper block in the bottom. So here's the question to start our class. Now that we have established the core concepts of the Mishkan, how do we begin to practically build this structure in our lives? So up until now, we've been talking somewhat conceptually and going over the general ideas of the Mishkan, how we place it at the center of our life, how we build this Mishkan vision, how we have to have boundaries in order to open the space where we can build the Mishkan. And really now, with these pillars is where we begin the actual construction. So where to begin? Like building a house, we must start with the foundation. And we're very fortunate in this class. We had a lot of fantastic material directly from the original lessons from Rabbi Yoel. So while this is somewhat adapted, a lot of these core concepts came directly from those original classes, and we've just adapted them slightly for a little bit of an easier flow in our reading and learning. So we all want to reach the ultimate goal, to go into the Kodesh Kadoshim, the Holy of Holies, the sacred innermost chamber of the Mishkan. Likewise, in a marriage, we want to feel that intense love and joy that we felt under the chuppah at the day of the wedding. We want to feel that every day. But sometimes we might get disappointed when it's Tuesday morning and our wife is just asking us to take out the garbage and not poetically professing their eternal love. This intense joy of a wedding is like the Holy of Holies, the most inner chamber of the Mishkan. Kohen Gadol could enter once a year. Of course, we would love to experience this intense joy in every moment, in every day of our lives. However, we find ourselves spending the majority of the time on seemingly mundane activities, working, cleaning, shopping, cooking, taxes, taking out the trash, going on an errand, going back on the errand when we forgot the milk. I'll add changing diapers to this. The truth is that these seemingly mundane activities create the foundations to build a life where the intense joy of the wedding can be revealed and shared. The lesson here is that it is only possible to establish the inner chamber, the Holy of Holies, after establishing the outer chambers in the courtyard of the Mishkan. Structurally, this Mishkan, which is our life, it must be stable, like it's built on rock and permanently there, and at the same time, flexible enough to be mobile, right? Like we discussed the concept that in each place that Am Yisrael would camp, they would build and take down the Mishkan. And likewise, in this pre-ultimate Geula time of the world, we have an aspect of motion and change in our lives. And we have to be ready that in all the changing circumstances of our life, that we can now build again the Mishkan, regardless of the outer circumstances. So the Mishkan teaches us how to make that happen. The copper foundations and the pillars of the courtyard of the Mishkan correspond to our fixed day-to-day practices. For example, saying Modeh Ani and washing our hands in the morning, making a tea for your spouse as you prepare your coffee, taking out the trash or putting the laundry in the dryer, fixing times for Torah study. You start with a simple base that's a circle to do the simple, regular, daily practices, right? think about our daily life. It can have a feeling of a circle, more or less. When we start to get into a flow or rhythm of family life, the day can often be the same. And it's not necessarily, I think we've learned the world wants to tell us that that's problematic, that we should have an outer newness, whereas Torah and the Mishkan are coming and teaching us that we need to find an inner renewal within this circle. So this base, that's a circle. That's doing all the regular daily practices. And in this, we can treat all the mitzvot. There's an idea of treating all the mitzvot as the same. The small ones the same as the large ones, because we don't actually know which is more or less significant. Of course, we always prefer the mitzvot with big inspiration, big sensation. But this is a mistake. If we build our Mishkan only on the concept of practices are connected to the element of copper, the lowest of the precious metals used in the construction of the Mishkan after gold and silver. We often regard these repetitive tasks as being in comparison to gold. How can making tea or taking out the trash compare to the incredible joy of the chuppah? Practices, although seemingly mundane and unextraordinary, are essential to creating the space where holiness can be manifest. And just as we're on the topic of making tea for our wife, and as we just passed the day of Gimel Tammuz, the Yom Halula, the yahrzeit of the Rebbe, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, that it was a well-known fixture in the Rebbe's life that at exactly the same time every day, he would go and sit and have tea with his wife. And I think that's just the most perfect example that we can use for this concept of foundations, and that this incredible tzaddik who was in practicality dealing with the world, helping thousands of Jews in contact with prime ministers, presidents, heads of state, but every day, no matter what, at a fixed time, he would have a cup of tea with his wife, and that this for him was one of the most, if not the most important moments of the day. So why is this concept of foundations, of consistency, of having these fixed daily practices connected to the element of copper? In Hebrew, in Lashon HaKodesh, copper is nechoshet, and we see that there is a connection, a shared root between the word nechoshet for copper and nechishut, which is determination. And there's also a very interesting Rashi that I believe he's bringing from the Midrash on the copper, the outer mizbeach, the outer altar, which was covered in copper as well. And so why was it covered in copper? It was in order to atone for brazen stubbornness, which is azut. And so what is this azut? So Rabbi Nachman says that there's two kinds of azut, which is, it's a little bit of a complex word to translate. Here we translate azut as boldness. I think we could also translate it as stubbornness, and there's also an aspect of strength in the root of oz, like Hashem oz lemo yitain, Hashem yiret et amo b'shalom, that Hashem is blessing us through the Torah with oz, with strength, which is the strength to stand steadfast. And so Rabbi Nachman says there's two types of azut, of boldness, of stubbornness. There's a holy boldness, without which is impossible to receive the Torah. As our sages said, the bashful person does not learn. And they also taught, why was the Torah given to Israel? Because they are bold, az panim, if I'm not mistaken. And be bold as a leopard is in Pirkei Avot. And this is the reason Torah itself is called Oz, like it says, Hashem Oz v'amo yiten, Hashem yirech et amo b'shalom, because it's impossible to approach the Torah without azut de kedusha. Rabbi Nachman will go on to say that there's the opposite, that there's azut, which is on the opposite side of kedusha, and so we need a certain wisdom to be able to understand which side is this azut coming from, and we'll come back to this. But the underlying concept here is we have our fixed practices that as we develop them, we know that these daily activities are essential for the maintenance of our home, for our own personal stability, for our personal and family connection to Torah and holiness. And in order to maintain these fixed practices, we need an aspect of azut. We need to be bold and stubborn and strong in a certain way. And so I think there's a fantastic story from Sipurei Maisiot that helps us connect to this inner quality of holy, I like calling it holy stubbornness, and we'll circle around at the end to talk briefly about separating the holy stubbornness from the not so holy stubbornness. But when we're on the same page with our spouse about these foundation activities for our home, for our personal balance, for our personal connection and family's connection to Hashem, to Torah, to Kedusha, and we agree that we are fixing this, so we can draw strength to stay on track from this azut to Kedusha, from this concept of holy stubbornness. So in this story it's a wonderful story of the burgher and the pauper, the merchant and the poor man, who each were married and without children. And then as the merchant saved the wife of the poor man from being kidnapped by a general and from passing this intense test, they were both blessed with children. And the daughter of the poor man was incredibly beautiful, with an unworldly beauty. And the two children grew up in school together and promised their parents and them, they promised to marry each other. But as the daughter grew, she became famous through the whole world for her beauty. And so all of the kings wanted their sons, the princes, to marry her. So they elevated the poor man and to become a general and a high-ranking official in order that his daughter could marry into the nobility. And so he ends up becoming the world emperor and breaking off the engagement with the merchant's son, who is then sentenced to death. But the empress, the wife of the former poor man who became the world emperor, has mercy on him and helps him escape. And he flees and he's shipwrecked on an island and goes through many journeys. But before he fled, the beautiful daughter gave him a letter, and in the letter was a map of the 7 bodies of water where the father of the merchant, the son's father, and the daughter's mother had hidden these 7 bodies of water while fleeing from the general when she was kidnapped. And at each one, she swore an oath to him that any good that she received, she would share with him. And the good that she received was the daughter. And so based on these oaths that she took by these 7 bodies of water, the daughter made a map for the son who she was promised to be married. And as he was stranded in this desert, he hid the map in a tree, but a great storm came and blew down all the trees, and he could not find the tree where he hid the map. And he was very distressed at this because he gave over these signs to 3 different kings that they could go and marry the daughter based on these secret signs that they had. But after 3 different kings came with signs, she said that she would only accept the original map in her handwriting. And now, as the story turned, the daughter was also shipwrecked in this desert, and they all ended up at the same oasis, the emperor, his daughter, and the son. But the emperor and the daughter were disguised, and the son had grown his hair very long from being in the desert for so long, so at first they didn't recognize each other. So this young man, who's the son, it was his routine that he would go every day and make a sign for himself on 3 trees and look for the writing there. That is in these 3 trees. For there were millions of trees, so he'd make himself a sign on those which he searched when he's looking for this map that his fiance, the daughter of the emperor, had written for him before he fled, in order that he should no longer need to search in these 3 trees tomorrow. Thus he kept doing every day. Perhaps he would still find the writing, that is, the note she had sent him, which he had lost among the trees as mentioned. And when he returned from there, he would come with wept-out eyes, for he would cry when he searched and could not find. They asked him, that is, the emperor and the beautiful daughter asked him, "What do you look for among the trees and then come back with wept-out eyes?" He told them the entire story, insofar as the emperor's daughter, that is, the beautiful daughter, had sent him a writing, and he had hidden in one of the trees. A storm wind came, etc., as we mentioned. Now he searches. Maybe he'll find it. They said to him, "Tomorrow, when you go look, we will also go with you. Maybe we'll find the note." And so it was. They went with him too. The emperor's daughter found the note in a tree, and she opened it up and saw this is her own writing from her hand. And I think we'll skip this because the main point that I want to connect to in this story is we go through our daily lives, and we're going shopping, cleaning, we're changing diapers, washing dishes, taking out the trash, going, davening, learning, etc. And we really have this longing for, as we said, the intense joy of the wedding, and we find ourselves dealing with the day-to-day of just living a physical life, taking care of a home, taking a family. And I think the truth is that Hashem really does want us to experience this immense joy of the wedding on a daily basis. And nevertheless, in this pre-Geula phase of existence, so we don't always feel that in a revealed way in our hearts, but by connecting to this consistency, just like the son of the merchant who went out 3 times a day in order to search for the map, when we stick with our foundations, with consistency, with a holy stubbornness, with an inner strength to continue on. So as we spoke at the beginning, this creates the possibility of entering into the inner space of the Kodesh Kadoshim, we are now opening the outer space by building the walls with these foundations of coppers and the pillars that we'll discuss in the upcoming class. And through that, we open the possibility in our lives. We are making the vessel to receive that immense joy and blessing. And I think it's worthwhile to note a traditional interpretation of that story, that the three trees that the son of the merchant would mark every day in the forest correspond to the 3 daily prayers. And I think that's one very important foundation or pillar of the Jewish home is tefillah, and the husband going to daven with a minyan in a Beis Midrash and a Beit Knesset. And that will lead beautifully into one of our next stories. But first, I heard a great story at a farbrengen for Gimel Tammuz, the Yom Halula, the yahrzeit of the Rebbe of Lubavitch. I'll try to tell it shortly, in a short form. That there was a shaliach of the Rebbe in Salt Lake City, who had done a lot of fantastic work in the small Jewish community there, to help families make a brit milah for their children, because until he came, there was no mohel, there was no rabbi who was able to do the brit milah in the proper way. So he would bring in a mohel from Los Angeles when there was a new baby in the community, and they would also there's a special way to make a brit milah for a child who had a medical circumcision in the hospital, but not according to the way of Torah. So also for a lot of children in the community, they were able to make a proper kosher brit milah, even if they didn't have one when they were born. So it comes to pass that one of the families in the community had a new baby, Mazal Tov, and they were coordinating with the rabbi in Rebbitzin, the shluchim there, in order to make the brit milah. And they also had an older child who was 3-4 years old at the time, who had a medical circumcision, and they wanted to make for him also a proper brit milah. And this particular woman was very wanted everything to be on schedule and according to every detail. And so they fixed all the preparations for the bris, that it should be at such and such a time on Monday. First, they would go to the home of the family, and they would make the brit milah for the older child, and then they would go to the home of the rabbi in Rebbitzin, the shluchim, to make the brit milah for the newborn baby boy. All is well and good. They coordinated with the mohel to come from Los Angeles, and set the whole schedule with the new mother, who wanted to know exactly at what time and every detail would be. And this is all fine until Motzei Shabbos, which was Gimel Tammuz in 1994, the day of the passing of the Rebbe, that the news swept through the whole community of shluchim around the world, and everything was upturned. But for the shaliach in Salt Lake City, the only thing you could think about was making sure that they would be able to make this brit for the newborn baby and his older brother. And as he understood clearly that the Rebbe had sent him there on a mission in order to strengthen the Jewish community, all the mitzvot, and what a significant mitzvah that this would be. So he calls immediately to the Moel, was also a shaliach, a chassid of the Rebbe, and he says, I'm on my way right now to Brooklyn for the levaya, for the funeral, and I'm going to stay there for the 7 days to sit shiva with other chassidim. And this Shaliach in Salt Lake City also felt a very strong call to be there with all the Hasidim in 770. And so he starts to make his arrangements. He finds the last flight out. He calls his wife from the airport where he's making a connection to forward the news that he found a replacement mohel who could come from Denver. And he hears back from his wife on the phone that the new mother, would only agree to go on with the Brit if it was at the time that was scheduled, with the mohel who was scheduled, and with the rabbi and rebbitzin there at the times that they had prepared. And if this wasn't possible, she didn't want to speak to them again about any Brit Milah. So, to make a long story short, it looked absolutely impossible. And when the Shaliach arrived in Brooklyn after the funeral, he turned the world upside down in order to find this particular mohel from Los Angeles, knocked on 100 doors through Brooklyn in order to find them. This was the days before cell phones, and practically dragged him, convinced him to hop on the very next flight that they could to Salt Lake City, and they were able to arrive in time to make the Brit. Okay, so what's the inner feeling, energy of this story that connects with us? This is the Nechoshet, Nachishut, Oz, Azut, the Kedusha. This is the holy determination, the holy stubbornness, the inner strength that when we have fixed something for good in our life, we are sticking to it. And that creates the foundation for the courtyard of our Mishkan. But it's very important to balance this with a story of the son of the Chofetz Chaim that Rabbi Yoel was very fond of sharing, that the son of the Chofetz Chaim was in Kollel, and he at some time the Rosh Kollel noticed that he was coming a little bit later, whereas most of the Avrachim, the students in the Kollel, would come for the minyan at 7:30, that they could start their learning Seder at 8:30. That this the son of the Chofetz Chaim, he would come. This Avrech, he would come at 8 for the second minyan, or 8:30, something like this. And so yes, you know what's going on. And he says, well, I'll tell you the truth. I'm coming a little bit late for the minyan because I have to do a big chesed. There's a woman who's alone at home with 6 children. And the Rosh Kollel says, wow, what a big chesed. You know, there's this widow, it appears, that she's alone. He says, no, it's not a widow. This is my wife. And Rabbi Yoel would always have a big laugh when he told this story, and I think it's a very important balancing point for the other stories that we've shared, because as we discussed from Rabbi Nachman, there is Azut de Kedusha, and there's this boldness, stubbornness, strength, and standing strong from the side of Kedusha, and there's also from the other side. And we need to have a certain wisdom to know on which side we're standing. And I think it's something we see maybe particularly in the world of Bali Chuvas, those who are coming back to Torah and practicing Torah and mitzvot, that there can be a drive to become very strict on themselves, and this can certainly lead to conflicts within the family and the home. And so we need to have a wisdom and vision on how we use this power of boldness and holy stubbornness to make sure that we're not being stubborn at the expense of our loved ones. And so that this is a balancing act where we need to know where to stand strong and also where to be flexible. And for each if we go back, let's see if I can go back quickly. For each of our pillars, let's see if they need to be standing just right in the foundation and the strings at just the right strength. But if one side is pulled too tight and the other is too loose, so the pillar is not going to stand nicely. Likewise, in establishing these pillars in our home and day-to-day life, we need to have this wisdom of where to be strong and say, we are committed to these fixed practices in our life, in my life, in our shared family life. And at the same time, there's also the flexibility to make sure that we are taking care of everyone in our Mishkan. And if that means going late to a minyan in order to be there and be present in the home, so we have to have the connection to our Mishkan vision to know that that is actually the best and highest way that we can serve Hashem and be connected with Hashem in that practice. And I think this brings us beautifully to the close of this concept, that one of the powerful outcomes of opening this discussion of what are our foundations, what are our pillars in our daily life, is that when we share and communicate this with our spouse, with our partner in life, with our families, that we can develop a respect and appreciation for what our loved ones need as their pillars, because it can be easy to be stuck in the mindset of, oh, why is my wife, why is my husband so stubborn about XYZ? Couldn't they just, just for this one day, let it be? Or it could, why do we have to be so stuck on this thing? But when we can take the bird's eye view, the higher level perspective of the shared work of building our Mishkan, and see, oh, this foundation is essential for my loved ones, my spouse's inner connection, personal balance, connection to Hashem, bringing their own life force and joy in health, holiness into their life. So with that appreciation, it makes it a lot easier to be supporting them, because it changes our mindset from, oh, I'm just putting up with this what might feel at first to be stubbornness, but now I can be supporting the solidness of their foundation. And so that leads us beautifully into our homework. That the homework is to take a moment to think of at least 3 practices that you have fixed in your daily life. And we're going to start out with 3, but we are going to try to build this list over the next 3 classes to 60, because of the 60 pillars of the courtyard of the Mishkan. And when we write these practices down, take some time to reflect on how these practices bring value to your day? How do they bring peace? How do they support your health, your inner balance? How do they support your personal and family's connection to Torah, to Hashem, to Kedusha, to holiness? How do they create peace, order, stability? Connect to your emotional feeling of commitment to maintaining these practices. Think of what you have fixed in your life, and what is the feeling that no matter what, I'm going to get up and say Shema before the time of Kriyat Shema, for an example. Now think of 3 new practices that you'd like to fix in your daily life. Write them down too, and reflect on the positive effects that you hope these new practices will bring. Most importantly, we're going to sit down and share these lists with your spouse, and together you can discuss what other practices you would like to integrate in your home. As a final note, so we'll be discussing for the next few classes the structures of these amudim, these pillars. Today we started with the foundation. We'll go on next week to go into the amud itself, the wooden column that was sit within the foundation. And the point I want to touch on is that the whole amud, the whole column, is one unit. And so all of these, the concept that we are discussing is this concept of our fixed practices, but we will be approaching them from different perspectives. So on this lesson, we were at the level of foundation, and we will be building into this foundation, let's say, deeper levels that we can integrate into our perception of these columns. And the purpose there is to fill these practices with more meaning and purpose. And the final point that we'll get to is how we tie all of these practices into the Mishkan vision that we have in the center of our Mishkan. So thank you so much for joining, and Bezrat Hashem, we'll be together again next week. Have a beautiful evening, and may Hashem bless us with strong foundations in building our Mishkan.